So as we approach the Feast of the Ascension, and of course, after the Ascension, the Feast of Pentecost, we want to reflect on how the mission of the Church should and could continue. The proclamation of the gospel to all nations today requires great sensitivity, especially when we relate with people of other religions or even those who have no beliefs in God. The way we are called to announce the good news is certainly very different from the days of old. In those days, there was aggressive proselytization, and sometimes religion was imposed by force, using fear. Fear even of being banished to hell and be burned in hell forever. Today, such methods no longer work. All these threats will not make people change their mind. In fact, they will only become resentful and they will be turned off by the gospel. And certainly no one today wants to embrace a faith that is under pressure. Therefore, it is important that in the first reading and in today's gospel, they give us some food for thought as to how we should approach people of other faith or those who have no faith at all. And so in the first reading, we find that St. Paul himself, he was already conscious that he had a different audience. Most of the time, St. Paul was preaching to the Jews, and so he could begin with the Old Testament. He could begin with the scriptures because these were already believed by the Jews. But when he came to Athens, to those who were non-Jews, the Old Testament did not make much sense. And that is the reason why St. Paul used a different method, a different approach in speaking to people that did not have that background of the Old Testament. And so here, before the Council of Areopagus and the people of Athens, he began first and foremost by affirming them of what they are already doing. And St. Paul commended them that they already have this deep thirst for God, this implicit acknowledgement of the existence of God in their life, seen by the sacred monuments that they had built, and most of all, even in their presentation of the gods that they believed in, they had an altar inscribed to an unknown God, because they also knew quite clearly that ultimately this God that they worship cannot be truly expressed in words or even in monuments. And that is the reason why St. Paul, speaking to them, used this as a basis to begin a dialogue with them with regards to faith in Jesus. And one thing is clear, that for St. Paul, we need to begin with people where they are, not where they should be. And so St. Paul used the very basis of what they were doing in order to help them to go further into discovering the truth of their belief in God. And I think this is very important because Paul VI, actually, in his document on evangelization, he said, when we proclaim the gospel, it does not mean to say we are proclaiming something that people do not know at all. Actually, Pope Paul VI says that this thirst for God is in the hearts of everyone. But some of them could not recognize it, or some of them cannot explain it. The very fact that all of us, whether we are believers or unbelievers, there is a deep thirst for the eternal. There's a deep thirst for something more, is already an indication, as St. Augustine would say, that our hearts are restless and that we are searching for the ultimate. Of course, not all of us can arrive at the ultimate. And here we can find that in the case of the Athenians, they were trying to find what is really that unknown God. Because St. Paul was speaking to different classes. There were those who already have certain gods in their lives, certain deities, and there were the intellectuals as well. They were philosophers. And so St. Paul makes it clear that we all, somehow, we belong to the same stock, the same family. All of us, therefore, belongs to this family of God. And he said, clearly, we are all children. We have no excuse for thinking that the deity looks like anything in gold. And it is important, therefore, for St. Paul to begin with the very fact that we all, in some ways, we recognize that we all belong to one family. We have the same humanity. And so there must be a way by which we can trace our origin. And this is very important. And the way that St. Paul invites us is what the church is always inviting us, to help people to understand their deep search for truth for God. That is why in the decree of Constitution of the Church Nostra Aetate, in our relationship with non-Christian, the church recognizes that this thirst for God is present in religions. And therefore, we need to recognize there is this deep reverence for God. You look at all religions, there is a deep reverence for God in their way of life, in their precepts, and we need to recognize that. And so, in our relationship with other religions, we need to begin precisely in that search for God. And more than that, the council also recognized that their precepts, their way of life, their teaching, they share in the ray of truth of the fullness of understanding of God. There are rays of truth there, and we have also made it clear that we should appreciate that these precepts, rule of life, that they too somehow trying to mediate God to their people who are searching, who are thirsting for God. But this is where, for us as Christians, the council also decrees that we have a duty to reveal the fullness of God to these people. Of course, we can understand, because Christianity is seen as a divine religion, as a faith that is based on divine revelation. Men, through their own reasoning, can only arrive at a certain level of God, through their experiences, through their reflections. So for Christianity, because we believe in revelation, that's why we believe that only God can reveal to us who God is. And Jesus, precisely, being the Son of God, can reveal to us the real identity of who God is. And the truth is this: if St. John in his letter says, all of us, we are called God's children. If they don't recognize that they are God's children, it's because they fail to recognize Jesus. To recognize Jesus is therefore to affirm our true identity as God's sons and God's daughter, because Jesus revealed our identity to us. But faith in Jesus precisely becomes the real obstacle, because reasoning alone cannot come to faith. And so when St. Paul spoke to them about Jesus' resurrection, of course, they laughed at him because it was utter nonsense. And so when it comes to interreligious dialogue, there is a certain level where you need to make the leap of faith. We can talk, we can share the goodness in each religion and so on, but in doing this, it is good insofar as we come to respect each other, appreciate each other, and even, perhaps even to learn from their own precepts and way of life, something that perhaps we can even use to enrich our own practices. But there is a certain limit, because at the end of the day, it's a question of having faith in Jesus. And for that reason, reasoning can bring us only until that far. So that's why in today's gospel, Jesus said, I have many things to tell you, but they will be too much for you now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will reveal to you. The Spirit of truth will reveal to us who Jesus is. So at the end of the day, honestly, it is really grace to come to know Jesus. It is really the work of grace to say, I believed in him. I surrender myself to Him. So, because at the end of the day, actually, it is this. Faith is not a matter of the head. Faith is a matter of the heart. It is the heart, ultimately, that believes. We can explain, we can speak, we can argue. It is a matter of the heart. It's just like in a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. We can explain to you how this guy is so good for you, man. You should choose him. You can choose. You can explain. You can give all the reasons. But if the heart is not moved, it would not happen. Then we tell you, this guy, I tell you, he's not meant for you. And still, you want to marry him because your heart is open. So at the end of the day, as I've said, when it comes to a relationship with God, it's a matter of the heart. Whether the heart will say, yes, I believed.